The Zyx'tharian High Council chamber buzzed with anticipation, quite literally, as the assembled scientists' wing membranes vibrated with excitement. Chief Researcher Vexa stood before the curved display screen, his iridescent scales gleaming under the soft purple lighting. The success of today's mission would finally earn him the recognition he deserved in the galactic scientific community. "Esteemed Council members," he began, his mandibles clicking rhythmically, "I present to you our latest acquisition from that unremarkable blue planet in System 749-B, locally known as Earth." He gestured with one of his 4 upper appendages, and the screen flickered to life, showing a containment chamber. Inside, a bipedal creature paced back and forth, occasionally stopping to scratch its head with its primitive 5-fingered extremity. The council members chittered among themselves, some in amusement, others in mild disgust. "As you can see," Vexa continued, barely containing his smugness, "we've managed to capture one of their more robust specimens. Note the inefficient bilateral symmetry and the complete lack of natural armor or defensive capabilities." He paused for effect. "Truly remarkable how such a species has managed to survive this long." Council leader Zyx'thar leaned forward, her crystalline eyes focusing on the specimen. "And you're certain this was one of their, what did you call them, military personnel?" Vexa bobbed his head in their species equivalent of an enthusiastic nod. "Indeed, Supreme Leader. We found it in one of their remote training facilities, though I use the term facility loosely. It was merely a collection of primitive structures in what they call a forest." The specimen had stopped pacing and was now sitting cross-legged on the floor, occasionally making odd faces at the observation camera. Several council members trilled in amusement. "Look at how it responds to captivity," commented senior researcher Mixed, her wings rustling with derision. "No sophisticated escape attempts, no sign of higher cognitive functions. It simply sits there, making random facial contractions." Vexa expertly manipulated the holographic controls, bringing up a series of brain scans. "Our initial analyses confirm what we've long suspected about this species. Their neural architecture is remarkably simple, barely above their planet's aquatic mammals. We believe they achieved their limited technological advancement through sheer luck and perhaps some form of primitive collective intelligence." The council chamber filled with appreciative humming as the members examined the data. None of them noticed how the specimen's eyes tracked every movement of the security drones or how its seemingly random stretches allowed it to map the chamber's blind spots. "Very well," Zyx'thar declared, rising to her full height. "You have permission to proceed with your research, Chief Researcher Vexa, though I fail to see what we could learn from such a primitive species. Your dedication to thoroughness is commendable." As the council members filed out, Vexa remained behind, watching the specimen through the monitor. It had begun making peculiar marks on the floor with its finger, what he assumed to be meaningless patterns to pass the time. He dismissed the behavior as another sign of its limited intelligence, not recognizing the complex mathematical equations being worked out in the dust. "Prepare the specimen for initial testing," he commanded his assistants, "and do try to use simple commands. We wouldn't want to overwhelm its modest cognitive capabilities." The human in the cell smiled slightly, continuing to draw in the dust. The equations, if anyone had bothered to decipher them, detailed the exact structural weaknesses of the containment field's power distribution system. The examination room gleamed with an otherworldly purple sheen as the human was led inside, sporting what the aliens interpreted as a vacant, confused expression. Junior researcher Kix Slyn fluttered nervously, adjusting her sensor. A raise, while Chief Vex-Thor supervised from behind a reinforced barrier. "Begin primary intelligence assessment," Vex-Thor commanded, his mandibles clicking with anticipation. Kellen activated a holographic display showing 3 basic geometric shapes: a sphere, a cube, and a pyramid. The standard test for primitive species was to match similar shapes. She held up a physical cube, speaking slowly and deliberately in what their xenolinguists assured them was perfect English. "Cube," she said, pointing to the holographic cube. "Match cube." The human stared at her, mouth slightly open, then proceeded to try eating the physical cube. Kalin quickly snatched it away, while several researchers chittered in amusement. As expected, BX04 noted in his log, subject displays behaviour consistent with early developmental stages. Proceed with basic colour recognition. The human, meanwhile, had discovered its reflection in the polished examination table and was making exaggerated faces at it. What the researchers failed to notice was how each ridiculous expression allowed their specimen to map the positions of every piece of equipment in the room through the reflection. "Perhaps we should attempt something even simpler," suggested senior researcher Mixtel, who had joined the observation team. "Their species seems to respond to audio stimuli. Try the sonic pattern recognition test." A series of simple tones played through the room's speakers. The human responded by dancing awkwardly, completely ignoring the response panel they'd set up. The dance, however, took their specimen to every corner of the examination room, providing a complete view of the facility's security measures. "Fascinating," Mixel commented dryly. "It appears to process audio purely as a stimulus for physical movement. Note how it lacks the cognitive capability to recognize patterns." The human tripped dramatically, bumping into a console. In the brief moment of contact, their specimen's fingers flew across the interface, executing a series of commands too quick for the surveillance system to catch. 3 security subroutines were quietly disabled, while the researchers were distracted by the clumsy recovery. "Let's try chemical recognition," Callan suggested, bringing forward a tray of scent samples. Even their planet's lesser primates can identify food sources by smell. The human proceeded to sneeze repeatedly, each explosive burst sending the carefully arranged scent samples flying. In the chaos, nobody noticed their specimen pocketing 2 vials that, when combined properly, could create a powerful acid capable of dissolving their containment field generators. Zyx'tharians' wings buzzed with frustration. "This is even more primitive than our lowest projection suggested. The specimen can't even maintain basic focus on simple tasks." "Perhaps we should proceed with cranial scanning," suggested another researcher, "though I doubt we'll find anything of interest in such an underdeveloped neural structure." As they prepared the scanning equipment, the human began humming tunelessly, rocking back and forth. The seemingly random melody was actually a precise mathematical calculation of the resonant frequency of the examination room's force field emitters. "Note the self-soothing behaviour," Mixel observed, "clearly a stress response, indicating limited emotional regulation capabilities." The human pointed at their own nose and went cross-eyed, causing several junior researchers to trill in amusement. Meanwhile, their specimen's other hand was tapping out a complex sequence on the examination table, testing the facility's material composition. "I believe we've seen enough for today," Bior declared. "Prepare the specimen for return to its containment cell. We'll proceed with physical capability testing tomorrow, though I doubt we'll find anything remarkable there either." As they led the human away, their specimen stumbled again, bumping into Keelan. The researcher barely noticed the brief contact, not realizing that her security clearance card had been expertly lifted, and replaced it with a convincing replica fashioned from examination room materials during the earlier chaos. "A completely disappointing day," Vexer summarized in his final log entry. "Though I suppose we shouldn't have expected more from such a primitive species." The human, back in its cell, maintained its vacant expression until the last researcher left. Then, ever so slightly, the corner of its mouth twitched upward as it began reviewing the wealth of information gathered during its performance of stupidity. Day 3 of testing began with Chief Researcher Zyx'tharians pacing anxiously before the Council's observation panel. His wings buzzed with barely contained frustration as he watched their human specimen fail yet another simple puzzle, this time by attempting to wear the sorting box as a hat. Perhaps, Council Leader Zyx suggested with deadly patience, you might explain why you've consumed valuable research resources for 3 days with no measurable progress. The human had now begun spinning in circles while making whooshing noises, each rotation perfectly timed to observe the positions of the facility's ventilation access points. "Supreme Leader, I assure you," Vexor began, but was interrupted by the specimen crashing into a testing apparatus. The impact sent components scattering across the floor, though none of the observers noticed how the human's hands deftly reassembled several pieces into a crude but functional signal interceptor during the cleanup. "We've developed more complex tests," senior researcher Mixel interjected, trying to salvage the situation. "Observe." A holographic maze appeared before the human, one so simple that even their planet's rodents could solve it in minutes. Their specimen spent 20 minutes trying to eat the light beams before discovering they could be used to create shadow puppets on the wall. What the research team failed to notice was how each shadow precisely mapped the facility's sensor blind spots. "Watch this next sequence," Mixel continued desperately. "We'll demonstrate their problem-solving capabilities with a basic reward system." They placed a new nutrient cube behind a transparent barrier with an obvious release mechanism. The human proceeded to lick the barrier repeatedly, each seemingly mindless action allowing them to analyze the material's molecular structure for weaknesses. "Fascinating," murmured a junior researcher. "It appears to lack even basic cause and effect recognition." The human gave up on the barrier and began bouncing the nutrient cube off the walls. When it was finally handed to them, each bounce's trajectory sketched out a perfect three-dimensional map of the room's acoustic properties in their mind. Vexor's scales had begun to pale with embarrassment. Perhaps we should proceed to the physical capability trials. They introduced a simple agility course. The human tripped over every obstacle, crashed into every barrier, and somehow managed to tangle themselves in equipment that wasn't even part of the test. Each accident allowed them to test the strength and composition of different facility materials. "Look at this data," exclaimed an increasingly desperate Kixlin. "Their endurance levels are actually quite remarkable." She paused, mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "They've maintained this level of physical activity for hours without showing fatigue." "Yes," drawled Zira. "Their capacity for creating chaos appears to be their only notable trait." The human had discovered that the rubber grips on their shoes could be used to create high-pitched squeaking noises on the facility's floors. They proceeded to compose what seemed to be a random melody, actually a complex mathematical formula for calculating the facility's structural resonance frequencies. "Perhaps," suggested Mixel, "we should attempt to test their tool-use capabilities." They presented the human with a series of simple mechanical puzzles. Their specimens spent an hour trying to balance various pieces on their nose before accidentally assembling them into what appeared to be a random construction. None of the researchers recognized it as a crucial component for bypassing the facility's security systems. "Watch," Callan said excitedly. "I believe they're beginning to show interest in our data terminals." Indeed, the human had wandered over to a computer console and was now pressing buttons randomly while making beeping noises to match the machine sounds. Each random press was actually executing a complex series of commands designed to create a backdoor in the facility's systems. "Enough!" Vexor finally exploded, his wings buzzing chaotically. "Supreme Leader, I request permission to proceed with direct neural scanning." Clearly, our conventional testing methods are insufficient for such a unique specimen. The human had begun drawing on the floor again, this time creating what appeared to be crude stick figures. Hidden within the childish artwork was a complete schematic of the facility's power distribution network. "Permission granted," Zyx'tharians said, though I fail to see what insights we could gain from mapping such a simplistic neural structure. As the research team prepared for the next day's neural scanning procedure, the human was led back to their cell, leaving behind a trail of scattered equipment and frustrated researchers. Once alone, they retrieved the small collection of accidentally gathered materials from their various hiding spots. The security card copied from Keelan would give them access to the lower levels. The signal interceptor, assembled from scattered components, would allow them to monitor guard rotations. The structural data gathered through their various clumsy adventures had revealed 7 potential escape routes. In the observation room, Vexer reviewed the day's footage, searching desperately for any sign of intelligence they might have missed. He paused on an image of their specimen trying to balance a testing cube on their elbow while cross-eyed. "There has to be something we're not seeing," he muttered. Behind him, the computer terminal the human had randomly interfaced with quietly executed another series of commands, further weakening the facility's security protocols. Tomorrow's neural scanning would prove very interesting indeed, just not in the way the Zyx'tharian expected. The night shift at the Zyx'tharian research facility was typically uneventful, which was precisely why the human had chosen it for the next phase of their plan. Junior maintenance technician Repo watched with mild amusement as their specimen pressed their face against the cell's transparent barrier, creating increasingly ridiculous expressions. "You're a strange one, aren't you?" Zyx'thar chittered, continuing his routine system checks. The human responded by attempting to mirror his mandible movements with their fingers, creating such a comical sight that the technician couldn't help but trill with laughter. Over the past few nights, the human's harmless antics had become a bright spot in Zyx'thar's otherwise monotonous shifts. What he didn't realize was that each interaction revealed crucial information about facility protocols and staff behavior patterns. "Here," Zyx'thar offered, slipping an extra nutrient cube through the feeding slot. "Don't tell the day shift." The human immediately tried to balance it on their head, eventually dropping it in a way that required Zyx'thar to temporarily lower the containment field. 3 seconds. That's how long the field took to re-establish itself. During day shifts, the human had developed a reputation for getting stuck in various positions. The medical staff found it endlessly amusing to help untangle their specimen from impossible configurations. "Stuck again?" Dr. Zyx'tharians, the night shift medic, would ask, her wing membranes vibrating with mirth as she helped free the human from whatever predicament they'd managed to get into. Each rescue required her to input her security codes, which the human memorized while pretending to be fascinated by the blinking lights on her badge. The specimen had also developed an apparent obsession with the facility's cleaning drones, chasing them around like an excited pet. The security staff found it so entertaining they'd stop watching as closely during these episodes, never noticing how the human used these opportunities to map the facility's automated system pathways. Even chief researcher Vexer Thor's personal assistant, Tixamar, had fallen for the human's seemingly innocent charm. The assistant often practiced their reports near the cell, assured that the specimen couldn't possibly understand their language. The human would mimic the sounds comically, making Tixamar trill with amusement while memorizing every word about facility procedures and upcoming security changes. Tonight, everything was coming together. The human had spent the last hour making paper animals out of their meal wrappings, much to Zyx'thar's entertainment. Hidden within the creases were carefully crafted lockpicks and electronic disruptors, fashioned from materials accidentally gathered during their various misadventures. "Time for your evening scan," announced Dr. Zyx'tharians, arriving for the routine check. The human immediately began their usual routine of trying to eat the scanning wand, causing... The doctor chittered indulgently. "You know," Zyx'tharians remarked to Rippo, "I'm starting to think Chief Vexer is wrong about them being completely primitive. They seemed to have a genuine sense of play, at least. The human was now attempting to juggle nutrient cubes, failing spectacularly. Each drop cube landed precisely on points that would require the most time-consuming cleanup, allowing them to observe the night shift's emergency protocols. "Tomorrow's neural scanning should be interesting," Zyx'tharians commented, helping gather the scattered cubes. "Though I almost feel bad for them. They seem happy just playing around." The human had curled up in their sleeping area, apparently dozing off while hugging one of the cleaning drones they'd befriended. The drone's presence meant the cell security sensors would read multiple life forms as normal, giving them a crucial window of opportunity. In the control room, the night shift supervisors watched the seemingly peaceful scene with casual disinterest. They'd long since stopped paying close attention to the cameras monitoring their harmless, entertaining specimen. None of them noticed the tiny modifications made to their systems over the past few days. None of them realized that their specimen had identified every weakness, every blind spot, every procedural gap in their security. None of them suspected that every seemingly stupid action had been carefully calculated to create the perfect conditions for what would happen next. As the facility settled into its night cycle, the human continued their slow, steady breathing, appearing to sleep peacefully. Inside their mind, they ran through the final calculations one last time. Tomorrow's neural scanning would require the highest security protocols, the most advanced equipment, and the complete attention of the entire research team. It would also require them to lower every security measure simultaneously to prevent interference with the sensitive scanning equipment. The human's lips curved into a slight smile in their sleep. Everything was ready. Tomorrow, the Zyx'tharian would finally get their chance to see what a human brain was truly capable of, though not quite in the way they expected. The Big Brain Scan Day. The neural scanning chamber hummed with energy as the Zyx'tharian research team made their final preparations. Chief Researcher Vexor stood proudly before the assembled council members, determined to salvage his reputation with today's procedure. "As you can see," he explained, gesturing to the elaborate scanning apparatus, "we've adjusted all security protocols to ensure maximum scanning fidelity. Nothing will interfere with our analysis of the specimen's neural structure." The human lay quietly on the scanning platform, appearing almost docile. Gone were the usual silly faces and random noises. This sudden change in behavior had been attributed to the intimidating machinery, a sign of primitive fear response they assumed. How wrong they were. "Initiating primary scan sequence," announced Cutlin, her wings buzzing with anticipation. "Beginning in 3, 2. Actually, the human spoke in perfect Zyx'tharian. "I have a few questions about your quantum processing arrays." The room froze. Vex's mandibles clicked rapidly in shock as he processed what he just heard. Before anyone could react, the human continued, now switching to flawless, high scientific Zyx'tharian dialect. "Particularly interesting is your reliance on trinary logic gates. Rather primitive, don't you think? Binary would have been more efficient for your needs." It speaks," Mick stammered, her scales paling. "But the linguistic analysis was exactly what I wanted you to see," the human replied, sitting up casually. "Just like your security systems are exactly what I wanted them to be right now." The facility's lights flickered. On every screen in the room, data began scrolling at impossible speeds. Security protocols that had taken years to develop were being rewritten in seconds. "Fascinating design choice, by the way," the human commented, as if discussing the weather. "Using crystalline quantum matrices for your main computer core, elegant but vulnerable to specific resonance frequencies, like the ones I've been calculating for the past 3 days," the human said with a grin. Vex'thor lunged for the alarm panel. His claw had barely touched it when every system in the facility suddenly spoke in unison, using his own voice. "Security protocols disabled by order of Chief Researcher Vexor." That's what you get for talking so much during your personal logs, the human added, smirking. Gave me plenty of voice samples to work with while I was randomly pushing buttons on your consoles. The council members began backing toward the door, only to find it sealed. On every screen, schematics and calculations appeared. Equations the human had been doodling throughout their captivity. The cleaning drone ballet was a particularly nice touch, don't you think? The human asked, gesturing to the maintenance robots, which were now performing an intricate dance around the panicking researchers. Amazing what you can reprogram with just the right sequence of accidental collisions. But the tests, Keelan whispered. The simple puzzles? An excellent opportunity to study your own problem-solving methods, the human finished. You really should work on your pattern recognition. Speaking of which, every piece of randomly scattered equipment the human had collected suddenly activated, creating a cascading series of system overrides that spread through the facility like a digital wildfire. Did you really think these facial expressions were random? The human proceeded to repeat every silly face they had made during captivity. Each one corresponded to a security camera going dark. Or that I was actually trying to eat your testing equipment? They held up a small device fashioned from the components they had accidentally gathered. I was really more interested in analysing their atomic structure. You've got some fascinating material science. Bit behind Earth standard, but interesting. Zyx'tharians' wings were vibrating so rapidly they were nearly invisible. The neural scanning. We were going to study your primitive brain structure, he exclaimed. The human laughed. About that. They pressed a button on their makeshift device and the neural scanning equipment displayed its recent calibration history. I recalibrated it last night. Hope you don't mind. Your night shift really should pay more attention to those leaping specimens. By the way, Rixow, thanks for the extra nutrient cubes. The copper content was perfect for the conductors I needed. The facility systems were now completely under the human's control. Every screen showed a different aspect of their masterpiece of infiltration and reprogramming. 3 days of apparent stupidity had given them access to everything. You know what the really funny part is? The human stood, stretching casually. I actually dumbed down my approach because I was worried about overwhelming your cognitive capabilities. Seems I needn't have bothered. Council leader Zyx'thar found her voice at last. What do you want? Want? Oh, I thought that was obvious. The human's expression turned serious. I want to discuss your species' habit of kidnapping other sentient beings for research purposes. The Galactic Council might be interested in that discussion too, don't you think? They pulled up a holographic display showing hundreds of outgoing transmissions. By the way, I've been broadcasting everything that's happened here to about, 300 different species diplomatic channels. Hope you don't mind. The translation matrices you so helpfully provided made it quite easy. When ... Mixel began, when did you hack our communications? Remember that delightful hour I spent trying to balance test cubes on my nose? Multitasking is a wonderful human trait. The human smile widened as emergency signals began flooding in from across the galaxy. Now then, shall we discuss terms? I've taken the liberty of drafting a preliminary diplomatic agreement. Don't worry, I use small words. The document appeared on every screen, written in perfect high legal Zyx'tharian dialect. Several council members' scales began changing colour in shock and panic. Colours shifted in distress as they read the implications. Oh, and Zyx'thar, the human added casually. Your thesis on primitive species cognitive development. You might want to revise that. I took the liberty of peer-reviewing it. The comments are extensive. As the facility systems continued dancing to the human's tune and galactic diplomatic channels exploded with activity, the assembled Zyx'tharian scientists came to a horrifying realization. They hadn't been studying their specimen. Their specimen had been studying them. As the Zyx'tharian research team stood frozen in shock, the human casually perched on the edge of the neural scanning platform, now converted into a makeshift command center. Multiple holographic displays danced around them, each showing different aspects of their masterful takeover. "You know what's really impressive?" the human mused, fingers flying over the controls. "Not a single one of you questioned why a primitive species had a military officer doing survival training in that particular forest." They paused, grinning, right next to one of Earth's primary subspace monitoring stations. Zyx'tharians' scales shifted to a sickly pale shade as the implications hit him. You weren't accidentally discovered." "Give the chief researcher a prize." The human's fingers never stopped moving across the holographic interfaces. "Though technically, you did discover something, just not what you thought." On the main screen, a new image appeared, a massive orbital defense network, previously invisible to Zyx'tharian sensors. "Humanity needed to know how your stealth technology worked," the human explained cheerfully. "And, well, what better way than to let you catch one of us? Your cloaking systems are quite impressive, by the way." "Were impressive. I've transmitted the specifications to Earth's defense forces." Council Leader Zyx's wing membranes trembled with rage and fear. This was all a human military operation. "Oh no, much better than that." Another display lit up, showing the logos of various Earth governments and organizations. "This was a diplomatic mission. See, humanity has known about your little xenical research projects for quite a while. Other species might be too afraid to challenge you. But humans," they shrugged. "We have this terrible habit of poking dangerous things with sticks." The facility speakers crackled to life, broadcasting in multiple alien languages. "Attention all Galactic Council species. This is an official transmission from Earth's diplomatic corps. We hereby present evidence of illegal sentient species experimentation conducted by the Zyx'tharian Science Council." "Don't worry," the human assured the horrified council members. "I made sure to include all the footage of your tests. The part where you explain your neural scanning procedure to your colleagues was particularly damning. Amazing what you'll say when you think your specimen is too primitive to understand." New alerts began flooding the screens, diplomatic responses from hundreds of worlds, many from species the Zyx'tharians had studied over the centuries. Fascinating how quickly centuries of fear can turn to outrage, isn't it? The human began pulling up diplomatic documents. Now, about those terms I mentioned. Suddenly, the facility's upper atmosphere defense grid activated. Zyx'tharians' wings buzzed in triumph. "Ha! The orbital systems are isolated. They can't be accessed from the ground facilities." The human finished the sentence for him, looking amused. "Yes, I know. That's why I had them reconfigured 3 days ago. Remember when I was dancing to your audio tests? Binary code tapped out in rhythm. Your orbital systems have been running on my programming ever since." As if to prove the point, the defense platforms began performing aerial maneuvers, spelling out "hello" in Zyx'tharian script against the sky. "Now then," the human continued, pulling up a new document, "Earth is prepared to be remarkably reasonable about all this. We understand that scientific curiosity drives progress. We simply have some concerns about your research ethics." The document expanded, revealing a comprehensive treaty, full diplomatic relations, technology exchange programs, joint scientific ventures. "All we ask is that you stop kidnapping people and perform your research through proper diplomatic channels." "And if we refuse?" Zyx challenged, though her colour had paled considerably. The human smile turned predatory. "Then I release the complete files on every illegal experiment your Science Council has conducted in the past century. I'm sure the Galactic Council would be fascinated by some of your more extreme research methods." A moment of tense silence followed, broken only by the soft hum of machinery and the nervous buzzing of Zyx'tharian wings. "Oh, and one more thing," the human pressed a final sequence of commands. Every screen in the facility suddenly showed the same image: Earth's rapidly expanding space fleet. Humanity really doesn't like being underestimated. Consider this a friendly warning. Vexor slumped in defeat. We never had a chance, did we? On the contrary, the human replied, standing up. You had every chance to approach us as equals. Instead, you chose to treat us as test subjects. A rather significant diplomatic miscalculation. They gestured to the treaty still hovering in the air. Shall we begin discussions? I'd suggest accepting the terms. The next human you try to capture might not be a diplomat. As the Zyx'tharians began the process of signing the most one-sided treaty in their species' history, the humans sent one final transmission to Earth. Earth Operation Trojan complete. Tell the Admiral his plan worked perfectly. Though next time, maybe send someone who's actually in the military. My diplomatic corps training made this almost too easy. In the end, it turned out that capturing a human hadn't been the Zyx'tharians' biggest mistake. Their real error had been assuming they were the ones doing the experiments.